gadget on your mobile phone to communicate touches, touch feedback.
I didn't quite get how it works actually. So does it touch your hand or ear or what is that?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't quite.
Reproduces the thing.
Yeah.
Currently, there's a device that is just inflatable, and so it reproduces what you should feel by just touching something.
Okay. So you get the same touches as person on that side.
Yes. Yeah. So it sort of reproduces the touches which are happening on the other end. Yeah, pretty weird.
Running for deaf and dumb people.
Yeah.
That can be interesting to use your mobile device this way. Maybe you can.
But it'd probably be not accurate enough to actually use for communication. It's more for the ambient sort of. Yeah.
If you're deaf, you can just use text message.
Yeah.
So you can't really imagine use for it until you go into some sort of pervert area.
Yeah.
And to generally use let's say this.
So can you think of a kind of a legitimate, not perverted use of it?
Not really.
Anyone? I mean, these guys do the research, right? They must have had some kind of good ideas in mind for this.
Yeah, well, maybe their ideas were perverted.
Because I couldn't come up with anything useful myself, to be honest.
You can stick with the emotive parts.
Yeah, but you can't really.
But yeah,
Because
that's
like
not really
emotion,
developed.
it's just touches. So
Yeah.
touches on the screen, so it's not really.
I mean, yeah, so those are the touches on the back of the phone, right? So you have a sensitive area on the back of the phone, and you can sort of do gestures there with your pressure, and then that translates to the other person feeling those gestures on the other side. So it's sort of kind of like this, right? Where you hold the phone and that person holds the phone. But
Yeah,
I couldn't get,
really
I couldn't really get the concept, to be honest.
when we get phones that can communicate fax, for example, yes, it can be usable.
The only thing I can imagine using for like the classical thing would be internet high five, where you just send someone a high five over the web.
Yeah, but it would be very, very sensitive.
It's like that. Yeah, that's so fast.
Ooh, high five.
I mean,
Maybe
maybe you could use it to identify that it's actually you on the phone. Like, sort of, okay, we have a secret symbol, but you can just call them and use your voice. So that
I mean, that was the point. I mean, you are calling them, you're talking with them on the phone, right? So you hear the voice. It's kind of an add-on. So it is kind of hard to actually imagine how that would work, how that would feel in a conversation.
It just can be used
if
for
you make
romantic girls.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah, but
touching
still.
her hand. While
if you make it, you can probably do something with it. But I don't think it will be worth the cost of putting it on the phone. Because you're going to need some sort of air compressor in your phone, which is not something that's useful for other stuff than that one thing, and it's probably going to weigh a lot and it takes a lot of power.
and it's analog, so it has to be correctly, precisely calibrated and keep being calibrated.
Yeah, so I thought that it's kind of an interesting concept, but I just couldn't kind of justify spending money on researching it because it wasn't obvious to me what real problem does it solve. And it doesn't solve any problem in particular. It might be an interesting gadget to have, but yeah, I just couldn't sort of think of like a killer app for this. Right, so yeah, think about it. If you come up with something useful, we can bring it up next week. So the first article, who can summarize the first article?
it's a summary.
It is already a summary, so who can just distill it to what they were saying?
I have
Anyone?
no idea.
It's like some meta articles talking about research, about research.
Right. So
Ways of doing it, improving it.
yeah. So the title is really kind of encouraging to read it, right? It's quite general, but it sort of talks about exactly what this lecture should be about. And then when you read the article, they talk about three things. One is you have to measure what the user cognitive model is, how they what metaphors they use, then how you represent them in systems, like in software or in hardware, and then how you measure it. And that is basically what the article says. Anything else you've got from the article? Yeah, I thought it was a little bit bad. So I thought it's kind of a good area, very good area, and very good attempt to summarize some of the challenges and some of the themes, but they haven't actually done anything beyond the traditional HCI kind of points. And there is nothing specific to mobile in particular in that text. It's very generic. So I thought, yeah, it's kind of an example of not well done summary for the purpose of a workshop, I guess. What do you think? So what do you think mobile user experience summary should be about? If you were writing that summary, say a one-pager, what would you talk about? What is different in mobile compared to that more traditional HCI sort of research?
Where inputs.
Different modalities? Like different ways of interacting with the device? Yeah? What else is sort of important?
Where you're using the device.
Exactly, the context, right? So with PCs, it's easy to say, okay, let's go to the lab, sit in front of the PC and do this testing for us. It's kind of the same as being at home and working with your PC, like being in the lab or being at home feels exactly the same. But if you're doing mobile research where you take people to the lab and sit them and make them do stuff, but nobody uses phones this way. Like everybody uses phone in that particular context on the street or right, while running, or and that's difficult to kind of separate the measurement without the context of how people use it. So certain things may feel a little bit synthetic, a little bit artificial, because people don't actually use phones this way. Even if you make them test some phone application. So context, yeah, what else? What else is sort of unique to mobile? So the different modalities, different ways of interacting with the device, and then different contexts and different circumstances in which we use the devices. And what else?
You're more prone to being interrupted when you're using a phone.
Yeah?
It's usually not that relevant because most applications just go into pause mode.
Yeah.
But it can be.
It can be. So the usage patterns are slightly different. You tend to have kind of a more frequent but less, but shorter kind of interactions. So you might be checking things and then taking your screen off. Whereas with PC, once you start a session, usually the sessions are sort of longer lasting. Here you are more, typically your interactions are shorter but more frequent. so the kinds of interactions we have with the device, the nature of those interactions is a little bit different to the traditional laptops or PCs.
Maybe you should consider different form factors. So in case of mobile, different screen sizes, and it matters.
That's right.
Much more than, for example, on the PC.
That's right. So that what the first paper was also kind of missing, that it does matter what sort of touch screen we're talking about, whether it's a 3 inches touch screen or even the watch, or whether it's a 10-inch tablet or bigger touch screen. So the form factor is important, and the other thing is, I think that we didn't have enough history of the development in that area, so things kind of change quite rapidly. So if they are talking about touch screens in 2009, probably there were not that many form factors at that time. So it made sense to just generalize it to a touch screen, which was probably like 5 inches or something, the smallest one. And nowadays it doesn't make sense anymore. The same as before, it was sort of easier to talk about phones and tablets, right? So even when Android was going towards the tablet market, they had 2 versions of the operating system. They had the version for phones and the version for tablets. So version 3 was only for tablets. Version 2 was only for phones. Since version 4, they blended, right? And now we have a smooth transition. We have 2 inches watches or smaller, and then we have 3 inches, 4 inches phones, and then we kind of blend up to 10. It's almost a continuum. It's kind of really difficult to draw a line of where one finishes and when the next starts, right? What's Note 2? Is it a small tablet or is it a really big phone? It's both, right? Yeah. So in a sense, you could have, and especially once the resolutions gets kind of ridiculous, like on that size device with 480 dpi, you can have 2000 pixels resolution, right? You can pack kind of 2 panes next to each other pretty easily. So it is a very fluid medium or fluid kind of a research area where drawing kind of generalizable conclusions is a little bit tricky. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the article about scrolling and swiping. So when Android came out, when the first Android came out, they had the navigable top level screens, and you could swipe from left to right, right? So you had few screens, and you could swipe from left to right and then navigate yourself this way. So users were kind of orienting. They had a home screen and then screen to the left and screen to the right, for example. And then you click to have the applications, and then the applications were using kind of a scroll metaphor. So you have one screen, very long screen, and you could scroll down and get the applications, right? Do you remember that? In Android 2.1. So when iPhone came up, they only had the screens. They didn't have a place where all the apps were sitting. The apps were sitting on the screen. So Android was using a metaphor that you have desktop type like placement for keeping your stuff, and then you have the drawer, which everything is in there, and you can sort of put the applications from there to your desktop and have them frequently used apps there, but have everything kind of hidden in this drawer thing. And the drawer was using the scroll metaphor. And some people were criticizing Android for being kind of too engineered and too complicated, and iPhone to be very nice and simple and sort of easy to navigate, because it gave the user sort of the paging metaphor and everything was there, right? But you couldn't really hide things from there. It was just that flat view.
You could put it in some kind of folder?
Not initially. So they introduced folders later. Yeah. So
was a common complaint?
Yeah.
About some kind of application, bookstore or newsstand, something like that. It was an application, but it was actually a folder, iOS terms, and you couldn't put it into a folder because Actually, you can't put folder in your code because it's impossible. Everyone knows that. So yes, and nobody uses that, and they complain that you cannot have it. So
Yeah.
that's your example. It could be easy, but if you can customize it,
that is true. Yeah. So in terms of customization, yeah, Android always wins hands up with hands down with iPhone. Yeah. So later there was a little bit of research done that it's actually better to have swiping between elements than scrolling, because when you scroll, then there is this part of you losing control of what is happening, right? So when you scroll, the screen keeps scrolling, but you're kind of not actually interacting with it. It kind of does its own thing. Whereas with paging, when you page, the page flips and stops, right? It doesn't kind of keep scrolling. So you are...
You can do that with scrolling as well. You don't have to continue going. You can just go the distance you actually scroll.
Yeah, but I think it's more about your paging. You every time you get the same result. It's consistent.
That's
so
right. Yeah.
Page looks the same, but with scrolling you can't.
It depends what the starting point was and so on. So typically you have the sort of a physics model where you scroll, it scrolls and slows down and then stops, right? But you have the friction sort of model. So it's not pages, it's more of a sliding kind of thing. So they changed it. So they changed in Android that now they don't have the scrolling thing, they have a paging thing. And yeah, there are places where scrolling makes more sense and where swiping makes more sense, right? So this article about the browsers compares two metaphors for having tabs. And the tab seems kind of like an obvious and natural thing to have, but there were times before we had tabs in browsers. You remember those times? So was it a nightmare?
It wasn't all that fun.
It was a nightmare. So when I started using Firefox with tabs first, and then when I had to use Internet Explorer without tabs, I was like, oh my god, I can't use it. I can't just use Internet Explorer.
There were those wrappers like Maxton, something around Internet Explorer, which was like using their IE engine, but it provided tabs and sort of features.
So what were your experiences? What do you remember?
About not having tabs?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember trying to find the right window after having open 15 or 20 of them. Okay, where's that one? And because this was in the time where having two monitors wasn't really all that common, so you only had one monitor. And of course, they weren't tabbed in the start menu either, so just icons are tiny on the start menu, and you have to go, okay, is it this one?
No.
Which they were squeezed together, so you can't see the name of the tab. Right? So this one, no. This one, no. This one, no. It took forever.
Yeah, the rest of the ones when you tabs, like pop-up things.
Yeah, and you don't remember which one?
You know which one it is, and with an annoying commercial or something like that. It was really painful.
Yeah.
For those times I had this
automatic playing sound.
Yeah.
I actually moved my taskbar to the right.
Mm-hmm.
So it was not horizontal but vertical. So it took more space because you had to give it some width.
Yeah.
But you had a lot of space for different windows.
Mm-hmm.
So it acted like tabs, pretty much.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah. Right, so when mobile browsers came about, initially they didn't have tabs neither. They were kind of one activity or one window per page, and then you have to kind of manage that. And then they started doing tabs. Some of them started doing kind of windows inside the browser. So in this article, they give an example of Safari, which is using kind of a Windows metaphor where you have windows and you can sort of swipe between the windows which you have opened and go to the page which you want to have. And then the Chrome, where they use the sliding metaphor and you use the the lining up of the pages kind of accordingly. So how many of you used Safari, or how many of you use the Chrome browsing with multiple tabs? Do you use it?
I use Chrome.
Yeah, and you use the tabbing option. So what is your experience?
I like it.
Yeah.
I think it's much better than the Safari option. I have used it occasionally.
Yeah.
And I like being able to type if I have a lot of tabs. That actually, one of the things they ignored in the article was that you can swipe and it keeps going.
Scrolling. Yeah, exactly.
I like that.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to sit like this
That's
until
right.
I finally reach the one I
When
need.
you know that you have to.
Yeah, I know it's in the bottom, so I want to just do that and then keep going to the bottom.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a very intuitive and very usable model. It's actually surprisingly well done. It works like you were saying about the circles. It's a very intuitive and extremely easy to use out of the box. So I used the Opera tabbed browser before Chrome, and it kind of worked, but I kind of didn't like it. It's a little bit clunky, and I always couldn't really kind of navigate easily. With Chrome, it's kind of fantastic. However, having said that, what do you think they've done which wasn't, which possibly could have a positive effect on the results of the study? So the way they've arranged the study. So can anybody kind of recall how they've done the study? What was the methodology they've used?
Actually, I'm a little bit wondering why they are using different colors to indicate the pages.
Exactly. Exactly.
Because so as I know, the visual system is very sensitive to the color changes.
Exactly.
But, normally we use the browser on desktop. We have a text, so there is no color.
No.
It's not easy to distinguish between these pages, especially when you're trying to open like 10 PDF files. So every file you have a just.
That's right. That's exactly my point. That it never happens that you have web pages in different colors, right? So it never happens. They're almost always white and they have text, right? You may have some different styling, but you don't have such a strong visual cues as to which page is which. And they using this particular methodology with colors was, I thought, a little bit ill-chosen. I mean, it's an easy one to implement. I understand why they kind of done it for technical reasons, and it's easy one to have users playtest it. But I thought the results might have been somewhat biased because of the strong visual kind of input from that. So if I get, say, 4 or 5 tabs, and each of them is in different color, I immediately know which one is which, right? But if I get 5 web pages, then it may take me a little bit more to kind of see which one is which. And I may need to, like in Chrome, when you're swiping, you can kind of stretch some of the pages a little bit before you chose them, right? So you kind of, you have to sort of play with it. And then with the Safari one, if I have a web page in the middle and just the edges of white pages on the sides, it's not colors, right? I can't tell whether the brown one is this one or not. I would have to swipe and see if that page is the one I really want, right? So I thought perhaps that methodology was, somewhat questionable. You could argue that it doesn't reflect the use cases of the actual people using the browsers. But apart from that, I kind of felt that study was well done. They pointed out the kind of differences between those two metaphors and between how the users sort of spatially orientate themselves. And it is true, the one with which the Safari is using is sort of letting people remember, okay, things were kind of on the left or things were more on the right? Whereas here you may remember that something was kind of down on the list or top of the list, but it's more about how much you can see in one go on the screen and how much you utilize the space. So in a way, you see a summary of the pages, right? You see 4 or 5 summaries of pages, and then by swiping you see kind of more of the summaries. Here you don't see summaries at all. You only see one page, and you actually don't see a summary. You have to go to the page, go to the page, go to the page.
I think I understand why they did it, but they ignored the fact that Safari limits you to 8 pages, which I think they have done because they don't want you to like keep swiping forever because you have 30 tabs. But they have set the limit to 8 so that you have to think about, okay, what do I actually need to have open so that you don't have to swipe forever. You actually have to close something.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, something that they have probably thought a lot about and figured that 8 is a good number. So when they just ignore that and say, no, we're going to have 16, I think that takes something away from the experience.
They can announce it in the next version. 16 tabs available in Safari.
Yeah.
Sounds like a major feature.
Upgrade, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And there was one more thing I wanted to comment about. Now I've forgotten what it was.
Yeah, so what I liked about the article was that it was well structured. It had a very clear introduction and very clear sort of problem statement. The argument about us spending a lot of time in browsers, yeah, maybe not. I mean, it's a little bit weak, right? So if they compare this kind of the task, and it's saved a few seconds or a few milliseconds, right? It doesn't matter that much in a sense, but the experience is there. The niceness of the experience and of the user interface is definitely there, and it's a little bit difficult to measure it. So they measure the kind of efficiency of the interface, but I think the more important thing would be the experience itself, because I really like browsing now on my phone given this new model. I was a little bit annoyed before, and I only browsed when I had to, and browse on the laptop more. But now I can keep my tabs there. I can kind of keep changing from tab to tab. And the experience is really nice, and I kind of really enjoy it.
I remember what. It's another thing that they haven't taken into account. That is usually when you use your phone to browse, it's you who have opened the tabs. So you know usually in which order roughly they will open, and so you know roughly where they are. When you just get handed one, they say, here are 16 tabs, find the right one. You don't have the same previous knowledge as you would normally have.
Yes, that's a very good point, yes. So that is, again, that's sort of something which they were not taking into account where measuring the...
I think they deliberately took it out because they seemed to wanted to say, okay, is this interface better than this one? But in doing that, they take away a lot of the other decisions that have been done around the interface in Chrome and Safari, and just look at the interface. And I don't know if that's the right way to do it. There are a lot of other variables that are in use when you use the interface, but aren't part of the interface itself.
Yeah.
You said about the browser, and I actually, for example, I keep a lot of tabs when I browse in my laptop. So I have up to 200 tabs open at the same time in Firefox. And well, it's usually when I'm working, and in the standard situation, it's like 50 tabs opened constantly. So I never close them because I have to do something about it. It's like a to-do list. To-do list in the browser. And I don't actually use tabs a lot when I'm browsing mobile. So it could be 2 or 3 tabs at most when I just have to switch from one moment to another one. But I still treat them as like they're instant. So I don't keep a tab in my mobile browser to get back to it.
Okay.
So I think it's actually another consideration to make. So mobile browsing is more ephemeral, instant. You want to see something, you open your browser, you look it up, you close the browser. And with mobile browser, with desktop browser, it's more browser's operating system where you keep your stuff.
Yeah, so to me, it's like I get a tweet with a link to an article, so I open the browser, but I don't have time to read it, so I read half of it, and then I just have to go, and it's there. And then I get another thing, and it's like I open another tab, and it's again half-read articles. So I end up having like 10 half-read articles, and they sit there in the tabs. And then, you know, next day, go to the toilet or whatever, and then I finish some of them, and then so I kind of have the tabs, not 50, but I do tend to have a couple of tabs open with things to read, which I started but I haven't finished. Yeah. Okay, so I think who of you is doing research in HCI or in user experience itself sort of field? Yeah. So did you find the methodologies they use sort of similar to what you use, or different, or? Mm-hmm. So that, like, for those of us who don't do HCI sort of user studies, we tend to measure things and then report in a slightly different way than the kind of a human-centric studies. And those articles, some of them have a clear, very clear sort of structure. And the structure there is that you usually report the measurements without interpreting them, and then you have the discussion section where you kind of discuss and interpret what you've got, right? So in more technical fields, sometimes those two are combined, and you're kind of reporting the numbers and at the same time kind of discussing what that mean and what implication it has. With more sort of psychology or HCI or kind of social sciences, you tend to report the numbers separately and then interpret them separately. So you keep those sort of things in the context and separated in different chapters. And those articles were kind of, most of them have had that structure to it, where the measurements, and so the methodology was described, how they've done it, clearly how many people, how the tasks were arranged, then the numbers, how many people did what, and so on, and then some sort of a discussion of what that meant. So that probably was a good thing to read and to be exposed to. Okay, so that kind of concludes our session for today. We will now discuss who is doing what next week.